The drowned crossroads. To understand why men lower cranes over a dead zone, we go north, where the Volga unravels into fingers and reeds and then forgets itself in the Caspian. People here talk about cities that breathed salt. They don't mean poetry. They mean walls that went under and roofs that rose again when the water pulled back, only to drown for good when the level surged. Somewhere in that shifting edge, the Khazar capital, Itil, traded grain for silk, wax for silver, and news for power. For years, Itil was a rumor with a postal code, near the delta north side where the channel's not. Then satellite passes started catching right angles in the mud, grids that didn't grow like reeds grow. Survey boats threw cheap sonar and got teeth back, steps, stalls, maybe streets. None of it was clean. The Caspian's moods smear everything. But fishermen began hauling up things that didn't belong to modern boats. Bronze fittings, a beadwork clasp, a length of blackened wood with pegs where a hinge should be. Meanwhile, something else was happening where the channels widened. Patrol boats began to idle in patterns, not along shipping lanes, but in lazy circles around a rectangle you couldn't see unless you drew their tracks for a month. They weren't guarding fish. They were marking a box. And when divers went off-grid to hunt sturgeon, they started hearing the hum, low, mechanical, not current, not storm. The kind of hum that hangs under steel. The stakes are simple and strange. If a trade hub sank, it didn't take only stories. It took stores. Warehouses don't empty themselves during a flood. And archives, the written kind and the traded kind, don't float. If a market that linked step to caliphate put its ledgers and its silver in rooms near the water, then some of that sits under silt right now. Alongside it, the heavy stuff, ingots, ores, unromantic inventory, waits where gravity left it. To make that more than folklore, teams started mapping anomalies. Public science came last. First came students with improvised side-scan rigs, hired by a local museum and paid in promises. Their maps met a wall. Next came a state university grant, their papers thinned into preliminary notes. The most detailed charts never saw a journal. They went into folders stamped with environmental logos and archaeology seals, and after that nobody answered email. But the water told on them. Buoys that were supposed to mark hypoxic plots drifted into neat lines above the best echoes. Ferries began to detour for wildlife. A month later, a floating platform appeared, braced like a lab but fed like a mine. Low boats arrived at night and left light. On shore, the road to the spit got new gravel and a guard with a script about bird surveys. Here's a micro story. A captain out of Astrakhan was eating herring on black bread when his deckhand put a corroded brass piece in his palm. It was a hinge, heavy for its size, and it carried a pattern you see in museum glass. He turned it over, frowned, and said, "We don't talk about this." 2 weeks later, his boat had a new radio and a different route. What nobody knew at the time was how the ground itself had betrayed the old ports. The Caspian rises and falls in long breaths. In the 10th century, it rose hard. Earthquakes didn't help. Masonry can survive raiders. It can't argue with water that climbs a hand's width every season. The Khazars adapted until they couldn't. Markets that had been steps from the quay became walls under fish. Some merchants fled. Some stayed and dug. Then the river shifted, the silt came, and Itil exhaled into mud. Fast forward to the cheap satellites and the good ones. Thermal bands catch faint hot spots where there shouldn't be any, pockets that warm and cool a shade off the lake. Conductivity readings dip and spike. Magnetometers twitch. None of that proves a city. It proves difference. Combined with straight lines and patrol rings, it turns a legend into an inventory list. Not did Itil exist, but what's on pallet 3 under 6 meters of silt. While that was happening in the channels across town, in offices nowhere near the water, permits stacked up. Cultural heritage surveys were approved over rectangles that matched the patrol circles. NGOs praised restoration zones. Reports promised peer review. Deadlines slid. Photos never hit public servers. Divers told friends they were counting zebra mussels, but they came home smelling like solvents and old metal. The human piece kept it real. A welder hired for 4 weeks on a research platform stayed for 6 months. He said the cranes moved like they were handling glass. He said the work lights were green, not white, to hide glare. He said a man with a soft accent kept saying, "We don't disturb context," while he tugged a hose toward a hatch that breathed brine. He didn't know what context meant. He didn't know the hose led to separators that didn't care about pottery. This was the moment everything changed. The story stopped being about finding a capital. It started being about recovering material, from rumor to grid, from grid to crate. The drowned crossroads wasn't a ghost anymore. It was a target. Unknown to most of the men on the water, the legal clock had already started. The special status signed in 2018 would make it easier to keep this quiet. But that's the next chapter. For now, north wind over the delta, silt in the teeth, and a rectangle under boats that pretend they're counting fish. The city that breathed salt gave up a breath, and somebody down there heard it. The legal trick, why lake matters. To understand the cranes and the quiet platforms, we need to leave the water and walk into a conference hall in Aktau, August 2018. 5 flags, 5 signatures, 1 phrase that did the heavy lifting. Special legal status. The Caspian wasn't declared a sea. It wasn't declared a lake. It was named what it already was, a body of water surrounded by the land territories of the parties, and then carved up by rules written just for them. Here's why that matters. If the Caspian had been treated like an open sea, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea would have brought a library of definitions, outside observers, and dispute mechanisms. Instead, the 2018 convention kept referees outside the door. It let the 5 draw median lines on the seabed, set national zones, and manage navigation and surface use more or less as a club. It was a pragmatic fix to decades of arguments. It was also a key to the vault. On paper, the convention solved old fights. Azerbaijan could point to median lines and say, "These blocks are ours." Kazakhstan could do the same. Russia and Iran kept navigation privileges they cared about. Turkmenistan could talk pipelines without a global shouting match. But the language also did something quieter. It gave legal backbone to bespoke deals, side letters, memoranda, port understandings, nested under national jurisdiction. If you keep a project inside those lines, you keep most of the world out. Now remember the drowned crossroads. If a recovery or an extraction sits over a rectangle in the northern Caspian, you don't want an argument about international oversight. You want a permit stamped by a national ministry and a treaty that says that's enough. The convention delivered that frame. Sovereign seabed claims meant a state could say, "This is archaeology," or "This is environmental restoration," or "This is mineral research," and the question didn't go much further than the neighbors. Meanwhile, something else was happening on land. The international north-south transport corridor, rails and roads linking Russian river ports to Iran and out to the Indian Ocean, wasn't a rumor anymore. Astara's port linked by rail to Rasht. Bandar Anzali and Bandar Abbas offered southern exits. When you fold those logistics into the convention's club rules, you get a pipeline without a pipe. Manifests that move under national flags, customs that speak the same quiet language, and a flow that rarely touches jurisdictions that ask hard questions. Stakes, they're huge and they're human. If chemistry at depth needs pilot wells and separators, you don't want global audits. If you're lifting crates from a sunken grid, you don't want salvage rules that trigger international claims. If you're testing brine for lithium or rare earth content, you don't want public tenders with international observers. The convention's special status doesn't grant blanket secrecy, but it narrows the audience and slows the clock. For people on the platforms, that's the difference between getting a shipment out at night and explaining it to a committee in daylight. Action followed the ink. After 2018, legal departments began writing to the new map. Ministries issued joint survey permissions that covered clusters of buoys. Maritime agencies published notices to mariners about environmental monitoring areas where anchors were discouraged. Cultural heritage offices expanded archaeology support zones that just happened to align with sonar rectangles. None of this screamed conspiracy. It whispered coordination. Then came the MOAS and corridor carve-outs. Ports paired up on paper. Baku with Aktau for roll-on ferries, Astrakhan with Enzeli for cargo handling, Astara with Rasht for the rail handoff. Customs signed Green Channel protocols for time-sensitive cargo anodyne language for food and perishables that in practice smoothed everything else riding the same trains. Export codes were tweaked. Industrial salts and minerals sat where lithium compounds might raise eyebrows. The convention didn't write those codes, but it shaped the ecosystem that made them effective. Here's a micro story. A shipping clerk in a Caspian port watched a new form appear in his software after a routine update. It wasn't flashy, just a checkbox for protected research cargo. Ticket and a different set of inspectors showed up. Ticket and the weight tolerance widened by a few percent. Ticket and the file number started with a ministry code he'd never seen. He asked a supervisor what counted as research. The answer, if the permit says so. What nobody knew at the time, at least not the clerks and divers, was how carefully the legal and logistical pieces had been braided. Military planners got security zones they could patrol without questions from outside navies because there are no outside navies here. Environmental agencies got money for monitoring, which meant boats and sensors and a reason to be near platforms. Archaeology teams got lines in the budget and in the water. Everyone had a story, and the stories fit within a treaty that said they could. This was the moment everything changed legally. The Caspian special status turned lake politics into a cover and a tool. No UNCLOS tribunal, no third party sailing into sea. Disputes were family matters, and family matters tend to resolve in rooms without cameras, in languages that don't translate cleanly into press releases. In the aftermath of the signatures, the map on the wall became a workflow. Median lines weren't just borders, they were lanes. Sovereign seabed claims weren't just pride, they were project files. And the corridor wasn't just a trade route, it was an exhale, a way to move whatever you pulled up, labeled in the language the system understood. To understand why those drones lifted in our cold open, why the radio went to static, you follow the ink from Actau to the deck of a night barge. The law didn't build the platforms, it made them ordinary. With the lock picked and the rules softened, hardware moved in. The shadow build-out. With the lock picked, metal followed. Not in parades, one hinge at a time. The first platforms didn't shout research, they wore its clothes. Square decks with white tents, orange life rings, a perfunctory wind sock. But their pilings planted over the sonar rectangles we just traced, including the box everyone whispered about near the old Itil grid. From shore, they were science fairs. Up close, the fittings told a different story. Under the tents, modular skids with stainless manifolds, cartridge housings, bristling valves, not trawls, not corers, separators. The intake hoses had coarse screens like you'd see on brine lines, not water sampling tubes. The discharge ran to bladders that didn't vent to air. They vented to low, silent barges. AIS told on them by its absence. Transponders blinked, then went to sleep for 12-hour stretches, as if a flock of marine biologists forgot to flip a switch at dinner every night. Meanwhile, on deserted spits, skeleton towers climbed, latticework with bulbous heads and gimbaled eyes. Locals called them weather masts. The masts turned their faces to the water like they were waiting for something to surface. While that was happening in the north, Actau's cranes found a second shift. Roll-on ferries idled longer between scheduled runs, for crew training, while forklifts shuffled pallets stamped with environmental logos. Turkmenbashi's new terminal processed more project cargo after midnight than at lunch. Baku's retrofit wings added berths for survey vessels. But the boats sliding in wore mixed livery and carried winches heavy enough to lower an armored car. On railway timetables, a new code began popping up on manifests moving from Astrakhan to Astara to Rasht. Protected research cargo. The customs line where you'd expect 30 minutes took 5. Here, where it gets concrete. A stevedore in Actau watched a flatbed roll on with 4 gray rectangles bolted to steel sleds. Each sled bore lifting eyes and a stenciled triangle you usually see near corrosives. The paperwork called them filtration housings. He'd never seen filtration housings arrive with their own blast curtains. He checked the destination, a numbered buoy field off the north shore, permitted as a habitat restoration pilot. Meanwhile, something else was happening inland. The Rasht, Astara rail link shaved hours off the handoff from the Caspian to Iran's spine. Green Channel agreements meant once a crate cleared in one port under a research code, its cousin's downline asked fewer questions. Bandar Anzali's yard sprouted shade structures over a strip of asphalt where trucks never idled more than 10 minutes. Drivers said the loads sweated in the heat. They said the tarps were new and the clamps were stainless and tight. The stakes in steel measure time. Research can wander, supply chains don't. When you pour concrete footings under a platform and string power from a diesel pack that drinks through the night, a clock starts. The fittings arriving in these ports weren't for a month on the water, they were for quarters. Someone had scoped flow rates, turnover, and maintenance windows. The line items: ion exchange resins, membrane sheets, peristaltic pumps, heat exchangers with exotic alloys. Suggested brine handling at volumes you don't bother staging unless you expect to keep staging them. Action drew its own maps. Night convoys left warehouses with their lights dipped, hugging coastal roads to unmarked gates. Customs exemptions lifted scales on certain lanes to prevent queuing near neighborhoods. A drone of small diesels pulsed over the reeds until sunrise, then cut with the gulls. On the water, work skiffs ran cables to the platform legs and zip-tied them high and tight, power up, data down. One morning, a soft-sided hangar appeared on a barge moored 200 meters off the main deck. The hangar ate a rib and gave back a stubby submersible with floodlights and manipulator arms. Unknown to the men tightening bolts, the shopping lists were visible if you knew where to look. Procurement bulletins, translated into bland, called for industrial ion exchange modules, pilot-scale electrodialysis stacks, and portable evaporators. Each line item paired with a grant number from an environmental or cultural office. The deliver-to-coordinates matched buoy grids sewn over the rectangles we can't stop seeing. What nobody knew at the time, at least not the welder and the stevedore, was how tight the INSTC spine had become as a feeder. A crate would lift from the platform under a moon too bright for comfort, ride a skiff to a low barge, ghost to a dual-use quay in Baku or Aktau, and catch a night ferry. From there it moved on rails under a research code, skipped the long queues through a green channel, and found itself at Rasht by dawn. By noon, the same crate was in a bonded shed in Bandar Anzali. The paperwork said salts. The handlers wore gloves like they were moving bees. Here's a micro story. A driver out of Astara heard a pipe hum in his trailer when he braked hard. He asked the yard boss what would sting like that. Air, the boss said. Then why does it smell like pennies? The driver asked. The boss handed him a sealed envelope and said, next time don't brake hard. Impact rippled outward. Insurers visited and left with fewer notes than they'd planned to take. The platforms learned to cut their lights to a gummy green that didn't carry to shore. Patrols adjusted their circles to push curious boats into reeds, and the ports settled into a rhythm you only get when a supply line stops being a project and becomes a habit. This was the moment everything changed on the water. The build-out wasn't a rumor, it was an ecosystem. Not a drill, not a semester, not a summer. A chain. A lake turned lab, a lab turned mine, a mine turned schedule. Which raises the question the cranes
The Quiet
can't answer.
Alliance.
Who's actually calling
While
the
the play?
platforms learned to breathe at night,